Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to the India's Global Jobs and Careers panel. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Puneet Shivam. Mr. Shivam is the U.S. head for Avendus Capital, a boutique investment bank specializing in cross-border transactions for mid-market firms. He's also global co-head for Avendus's BPO practice. Puneet has extensive experience building organizations across functions in both the U.S. and India, having established Avendus's U.S. office and managed the EXL Inductus's management consulting practice. He's been a leader in the business process outsourcing industry since its beginnings. With that, I'd like to hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you everyone for giving myself, and I think I speak on behalf of all the panelists, a chance to speak to all you folks. Today, I'll just go through the introductions and then cover a little bit of the format we'd like to follow. And given the topic, my suggestion would be that we keep it very, very interactive. I know it's end of the day, but it will be great if you can step up, ask any questions you may have, because between all the panelists, you have probably all the perspective that are possible on this emerging opportunity, which is kind of growth of India offers, not only in India, but around the world. So let me start with introduction of the panelists, and then I'll request the panelists to take a couple of minutes to just give their overall perspective on this opportunity and what it means for careers for folks like yourself. And then I would actually ask you to raise whatever questions you will make sure that we would like to make sure that we cover in the rest of our discussion so that we don't miss any of the key points. And then we'll go through some subtopics which are various facets of career, which I'll cover in a minute. So let me start with the introduction of these panelists. First one, Gunjan Bagla. He's a 25-year global sourcing expert, having sourced various kind of engineering and technology services from across the globe, not only India, but also from countries like China and Japan. He currently runs a consulting firm, Amritt. He's also founder of that, and he has authored a couple of books, the last one being Doing Business in 21st Century India, How to Profit Today from Tomorrow's Most Exciting Market. And Gunjan has also been interviewed by leading channels such as Fox, BBC World, BBC News. So I believe he would be a great addition to this discussion. So Gunjan. Next to Gunjan is Praveen Chennareddy. Praveen is VP of Strategy at Marathon Data Systems, a SaaS-based office management software provider company based in New Jersey. Before that, and Praveen has actually interesting perspective from multiple angles. So right now he's VP of Strategy for a SaaS-based firm. Prior to that, he was an investor. He was a principal with Gaja Capital, which was actually one of the very leading private equity investors in India. And before that, he was vice president with Merrill Lynch's alternative investment arm. So that I think completes the perspective on this and kind of any opportunity between India and US. And interestingly, for some of you, he is also an MBA from Chicago Booth School. And we have actually benefit of having 3 of your alumni among the 4 panelists. So I think that's great. Then Prabhakar Reddy, he's managing director of ANSR Group. It's a firm which provides advice to companies who want to leverage India as a outsourcing destination, whether through their third-party partners or through themselves, and advises those companies across various facets of from choice to implementation, and has been responsible for approximately 10,000 jobs being created in India. And he is also into venture capital management, having established Naya Venture Capital, and also a founding investor and CIO of RiseSmart.com, which is a HR outsourcing company, and he's also an MBA from the Booth School. And then finally, we have Ganesh Pai. He's head of insurance and head of EMEA region for a company many of you may know, Emphasis. It's an IT sourcing company, IT consulting company, currently owned by EDS, majority owned by EDS, and has been with them right through their beginning, which is almost the beginning, 14 years. So that company has grown from it has seen right from being conceived in India to finally being part of EDS, HP. So he can give a very interesting perspective of how the Indian careers and Indian outsourcing market has grown over the years. He's also lately has done mergers and acquisitions transaction in which Emphasis acquired for a leading insurance company their captive. So probably has a great experience in understanding how US companies captive, the challenges of not only acquiring it but integrating it with an Indian company, and that shows probably will give a good perspective on how the cultures may clash and may match between these two, and he's also a Booth MBA. So with that, I'll invite Gunjan to start with like a little bit of overview of what you see this opportunity, how you see this being relevant to MBAs from great schools like Booth.
Okay, so I understand the question is there an opportunity for Booth MBAs to go work in India or go work for an Indian company? Would that be fair?
Yeah, it's basically with the change in Indian context,
Sure.
what are the opportunities that open up? That may be with Indian companies or global companies.
Okay. Now, I am the intruder here, the one non-Booth alumnus, so I'm going to try to be heretic all the way through. So before I answer that question, I have a question for you, for the audience, if you can raise your hands. How many of you are from India and came here to study? Okay. And how many of you are ABCDs? Okay. Everybody knows what that means, right? Okay. And then how many of you are people of non-Indian origin who grew up here and have an interest in India? Okay. So when you look at the Indian opportunity, among those three segments, the folks that will have the hardest time really are the ABCDs. Okay? You have to recognize that, because when someone like Dan goes to India, okay, people in India will give him a pretty wide berth, right? Okay. For 5 years you can say, I don't really understand India, okay? And you can get away with it, okay? The folks who grew up there, I think, they see the new India. They know exactly what has happened in the last 20 years, and they'll do okay. It's the ABCDs that have the toughest time, because people in India expect you either to know everything or never to know everything, okay? And so you have to work harder, really, than anybody else. That's just, it's reality whether you like it or not. Now, there is tremendous opportunity in India, I think. But for each of these groups, I would say you have to be pretty determined if you want to make a career in India. It's, in many ways it's very attractive, but it is still a tough place, to live and work and to succeed. And you shouldn't take it lightly. In writing my book, I interviewed over 100, mostly Americans, working in India. And I found that many people give up after the first couple of years and go back. And they'll give you any number of reasons why. Those who stick beyond 2 years generally become Indophiles and I talk to people who left India 15 years ago and keep going back every year, even after retirement, because the country captivates them. Right? But you have to really determine whether you can deal with those first 2 years and hold it out to engage with the country. So that's my first bit of caution. Don't jump into India without that preparation. The second thing I'll say, and we can delve into it deeper, don't think of India as an IT destination alone. There's great excitement in India in banking, in manufacturing, in virtually every sector. So don't think of it as, with that narrow prism of, TCS and Wipro and Emphasis and IBM and Accenture being the only opportunities there. Those are all great companies, but there's a lot more out there. Let me stop there.
Hi, everyone. Well, I am the ABCD on the panel, so I'm happy to answer any of those questions. I think to add on to what Gunjan said, at one level, when you're thinking of a career in India, I think one thing to think about is how do you view India? So do you view it as a market in itself, or do you view it as an outsourcing opportunity? And these are two very different approaches. And to add on to what he said, if you look at the Nifty 50 stock market, the capitalization is around 750 billion. Let's say 115 billion of that is in IT, 25 billion is in pharma, and the rest is domestic. So, there's a huge opportunity, not just on the outsourcing side, but on the consumer side within India. So you have to really think about that. And the other aspect to think about, moving anywhere and doing work anywhere is a very personal decision. And I think your ability to succeed anywhere depends on a few things. What domain knowledge, what skills that you have, the network that you have, which always matters, and sort of, if you join an organization, that organization's ability to let you do work and let you grow within it. And so this, it's not a blanket question that yes or no, you should move to India. There's a lot of things to take into place, and a lot of the skills that you have to see what's relevant and what's not relevant. And happy to get more into that. But overall, I think the opportunity is tremendous.
Great. Well, this is interesting. One of my businesses is in the business of creating high-end jobs in India. And over the last 7 years, we've taken lots of name brand multinationals from banking, consumer packaged goods, retail, media companies, and healthcare companies to India. And these are U.S. domestic market companies, or maybe globally operating companies. But they have looked at India as a strategic asset, not as a back office, not as a, I want to get my IT and my website built. That's great. I have Infosys to do that. But I want to create a strategic asset by getting access to the human capital talent that's available to do everything from my high-end analytics to designing my stores of the future to doing my investment banking or my mortgage analytics or doing my buy-side M&A research. So when you look at the kind of jobs that are being sourced in India, they're not just looking at India as an IT player. IT is the name India got recognized with. But when most of my clients go and talk to me about why we want to be in India, it's always a long-term strategic asset, plus the time difference. So, like Gunjan mentioned, there is all kinds of opportunities, IT, financial services, retail, consumer retail, healthcare companies. Everybody's operating in India. The consumer base is huge, and like Sailesh said, very almost, the headroom is so large. It's not your typical 20-30%. The headroom is 90% in almost every sector. So when you think about an American company operating in a almost flat or 2% growth in the North American market, and looking at where they need to grow and become globally competitive so they don't need to lay off people, they have to go and move into emerging markets. And because of the prevalence of English-speaking talent in India, India becomes almost a strategic asset for them to create a base in the rest of the world. And you can always go to Poland and China and Brazil and Argentina, but in terms of pure English-speaking scale, that's the best place in the world to go to. And I think CEO of TCS made a very interesting comment. 136 million jobs are going to be created. Now, when you think about the 136 million jobs, who do you think is going to manage them? The big talent dearth in India is not at the entry level. We've got plenty of engineers and PhDs and statisticians and science graduates coming out. What India severely needs is leaders that understand the Western culture of operating in Western organizations, smart people that have the luxury of going to some of the best business schools in the world and applying all of the discipline of Western organizations and efficient organizations and process improvement and technology, and then translating that and going and being able to manage people in a different culture. So the three things in the system is, one is understanding the business culture. You're never going to be able to understand the culture by sitting over here, even if you are of Indian origin, because India is changing by the second. So like the CEO of TCS said, get on a plane and go there. But as Gunjan pointed out, don't go there without a plan. So you got to be there. The second thing is infrastructure. The perception of everybody when they think of India as this, almost there's the third world India, the Africa part of India, the UK part, and then there's the affluent part. Most of the infrastructure that's been developed for the working environment, when you go to the Infosys campus in Bangalore or go to the Google campus in Delhi, it beats the Google campus in Mountain View in terms of perks and infrastructure. So you have the best world-class working environment in there. The third thing is the society. How do you manage people in India? I'll give you an example. People take job offers not because of the brand of the company, it's because their family approves that they can work there so they can get married because they work for a good brand company. It was a joke in the outsourcing show on NBC or whatever show that it is, but in reality, we have a very tough time recruiting good talent from top-notch brand companies like GEs that are already operating in India and Siemens, because I can give them a 100% salary hike, but if their family doesn't think they know the brand, and when I took Wells Fargo to India, they thought it was a transportation company because they looked at the stagecoach. So, the perception of what they think is a good company is very different. So when you think of India as an opportunity, India needs leaders. India needs smart people like the people coming out of the Booth School of Business. And there's a lot of opportunity, but like Gunjan said, you have to have a plan, you have to understand how to operate in that market, and the only way you can do it is actually go there and intern and spend 2 years. It's an investment. So that's my kind of high-level macro, and I'm sure we'll dive into questions and specifics of, how you even come up with that plan, and would be glad to answer that. So.
Ganesh, thanks. I'm from the outsourcing industry, so let me share with you my perspective in terms of what's happening in the outsourcing industry and where companies like us are struggling, where do we see the knowledge or talent gap, and that's what I think you guys should see as an opportunity for yourself. So if you take a step back and look at the outsourcing industry, the global sourcing industry for IT and BPO services is about $109 billion in 2010, of which roughly 55%, $59.4 billion, is sourced out of India. That was in 2010. Now that translates to about 240,000 jobs, new jobs that was added in India last year alone, taking the total direct employment in that sector to about $2.4 million. Sorry, 2.4 million employees. So if you look at that, the traditional outsourcing companies, from a value proposition that was driven by labor arbitrage, are now trying to go up the value chain. Right? They're trying to offer consulting services. They're trying to offer domain consulting services. They're trying to bring in thought leadership. They're trying to create end-to-end solutions. And I'm talking about the IT and BPO space. They're getting into analytics, stuff that Prabhakar talked about. And when you look at this, and you look at the talent pool that is available in India, India itself is churning out something between 3.5 and 4 million graduates and postgraduates every year. Right? But a study by Hewitt states that less than 20% of that have employability in the Indian IT and BPO sector, because the education system in India, there's a weak alignment to what the industry requires. And that's where people like you come in. There are tremendous opportunities to fill that gap where people with not only excellent education from Booth School of Business and other business schools out here, but also if you have work experience here in your own industry, whether you come from banking or capital markets or insurance or manufacturing or telecom, you bring in that industry knowledge, you bring in that local market knowledge that companies like us value to go to customers and put you guys in front of the customers to create an end-to-end solution to solve their current business problems. So that's one opportunity. The second opportunity is that Indian companies are going global. They're no longer looking at having low-cost centers in India, but they're looking at alternate low-cost destinations for servicing their customers, for servicing the needs of their global customers. Eastern Europe, for example, Latin America, China. And again, with India as a base, many Indian companies, they're concentrated around India, servicing their customers globally, but also have a local need. There is a need to transfer processes and how you service your customer from their centers in India to other parts of the world that they choose to be in. And that there again, there's a gap in terms of knowledge of markets, cultural orientation, etc. Again, an opportunity for a lot of people in this room to be a part of organizations that have a global, India-based organization that have a global strategy. And third, and last but not least, is client relationship management. Again, when 90% of the work that services companies like us are being delivered out of offshore locations, you have a very small on-site presence, and you are expected to be a bridge between your customers here and the teams that are delivering services to customers in India. Again, another opportunity for people like you to be that interface where you bring in the knowledge, since most of you are in category A, which is people who have grown up in India and come here. You understand the culture that is in India. You understand how to deal with people in India. So those are some opportunities that exist, and we'll talk more about in the Q&A session what are the challenges we face and how you can cope up with those challenges.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So as you can see from both the introduction and the overview, that kind of it's no longer a single point opportunity. So at this point, it will be great if we can just hear back from you guys that what areas do you want to make sure we cover. And please, make the list as long as possible, because that's probably the best way to leverage the expertise that we have here. Can you just get the mics?
First question is for Mr. Wangla. In terms of talent graduates from the United States and hires locally, I will read your book, but what are some of the common challenges? And the second question is for Mr. Piano. It helps in any venture to have a restructuring. So what sort of compensation
Sure. So we will actually go through these questions and then we'll address it when we go through the appropriate subsection.
Hi, my question is that I graduated this last year and trying to get a job in India. We all have to go salary there. You know I'm able to pay that load. So you all think if you go back job opportunities, then how do you go on the salary?
Very honest question.
I'm graduating this year, and I'm also one of the people from my class going back to India. So I think there is kind of a debate, at least in my mind, that am I doing the right thing, and what's the right point of time that we go back to India? Because as already said, there is respect that there is a good you have a 3 years of experience, but then you're thinking after 5 years of go in India, and all the time experience for 2 years.
Okay. So I'll just rephrase that question probably. Is that the role of, what can people like who are in the room do to impact that imbalance and improve the public sector performance in India? Probably that's the heart of the question. Yeah, so what... Got it, got it.
Hi, thanks for being with us. We hear a lot about the value of trusted education and work experience and how that translates into so many good address this first, but some experience in India through for a global education.
So how that question? The first question is around the diversity aspect of talent. What kind of practices to do to improve the employment of the graduates? Maybe this year, CEO mentioned and they're partnering with the university. So that's just a kind of question there. And I think the second question is, one of the big challenges I've heard about the countries in India is the attrition rate. A lot of companies invest in training employees and then leave after 1 year or 2 years. What are some of the things the companies are doing to actually keep their employees?
Okay. Got it. Okay, very interesting. Okay, so I think we should move on, and again there will be further opportunities to raise questions. I was gathering these questions so that we can frame the rest of the discussion. Just one question, given that the theme of question seems to fall in some category. How many of you folks are currently planning to go back to India after doing your studies here? And how many of them are then, because I know your hand was not raised, how many of them are not just going back to India but are working in fields which are related to India, either for Indian companies or... Okay, so fair bit, around 50% people have something planned related to India. Okay, good. So folks, what we will do now is that and I reflected back on how I have made my career choices and tried to look at the 4 criteria on which people decide. And I would like each panelist, depending on their vantage point, to reflect on or comment on those 4 points. So let me highlight the 4 points. Especially with the change in country, one is overall ecosystem. I heard people talk about roads, people talk about power situation, politics, pollution, whatnot. So there is one aspect which is overall ecosystem you join when you especially move geographies. So that's one criteria, not in any particular order. The second is work culture, which relates to work culture, growth opportunities, learning opportunities. So whenever people choose careers, I think that's one other important criteria. Third is ability to make an impact, which is kind of, what role will you play, how relevant that role will be over a period of time. And fourth, as the question was there, what is the economics, financial gain, what is the capitalistic view of a job? And in my view, these are the 4 criteria broadly which people use to decide. So what I would request each of the panelists to take one of these points, each panelist, other panelists can comment on that, and then again and we will try to cover these questions during that discussion, because your questions will fall largely in those buckets, and then you can follow up with additional questions. So the first topic I'll pick up is overall ecosystem, which includes things like business culture, infrastructure, social pressures. And given what Prabhakar has been doing for many years now, I'll invite Prabhakar to open up with take 3-4 minutes to just give your perspective in what is the overall ecosystem, what choices are people making, what are they giving up, what are they getting?
Yeah, this is very relevant, and point duly noted about the salary. That's a big decision, but also I want to talk about, when we talk about business culture, so for most of us that have grown up in India, the family is a very important criteria in making a decision on where you go, what you go to study, whether you become engineering or commerce or finance. So it's kind of inbred into the whole DNA from your growth. Everybody is extremely competitive. From before you even come out of college or get to college, you have to write some entrance exam. You have 250,000 people applying for 2 seats. So it's an extremely hyper-competitive environment. So the same thing translates into the workforce. So when you go into your workforce, you're fresh out of college, the competitive nature, especially when you're working for an IT organization that's servicing you as clients or working for a multinational which has our operation in India, the people coming out of college is there. I'm only talking about the employable segment of the people that are graduating in India. They are extremely competitive. And not that the people here working are not competitive. It's just this almost you're taking what you were doing in school in terms of grades and ranks and who got 99% versus 92%. That's taken to the workforce. And especially with the incentive, because of the way the pay grades are structured, the top performers have the opportunity to come and work for the corporate head office in the U.S. or get a stint to come and spend 6 months in the U.S. So everybody's kind of competing amongst each other almost to be the cream of the crop or the top 5% or the 20%. So the general business culture in India, especially when, I remember and no dig against the IITs, and Puneet, your IIT. I grew up in India. I wanted to be an engineer. I gave my IIT entrance exam. I didn't get in, so I went to my local Andhra University, So I went to a party, and my mom introduced me, and, he's doing engineering. And this other lady said, are you doing it at IIT? I said, no, I'm at Andhra. She's like, oh, okay, so I'm sorry. That made a huge impact on my life. I was 17 years old. I was crushed. So I wanted to prove that just because I didn't get into IIT doesn't mean I can't make immense amounts of wealth and I cannot succeed. So I chose a route to come to the U.S., do whatever I did, came back to the Booth School of Business, and, I had my motivation factor. So when you look at the people working in India, and some of my business partners are IIT guys, so, I got that. But you have to think about the people that you're dealing with. They're working, they're motivated, they get paid whatever they get paid, but at the end of the day, they're going to be responding, and they're all striving to be recognized and get more salaries. The other thing we do, and we see all the time, is when you go out of college here and you get a job, you work for 2-3 years, you're entry level, you're part of a team. In India, it's this whole rank has its privilege, British hierarchy kind of concept. People want to manage people. Everybody wants to be somebody's boss. So within 6 months, I've got a trainee saying, where's my junior trainee? I want to mentor him. So in the first 3 years in Indian organizations, you have 7 grade levels. Every 6 months, I need a promotion. So it's almost like they want, you start off at 10,000. Within 3 years, they want to be at 40,000. You can't even relate to that, because when you get hired out of college here with an entry-level salary of 40,000, it's like going to my boss and saying, I expect to be making in 3 years 120,000, otherwise I'm going to leave. That doesn't work over here. But in India, that is expected. So how do you manage that, right? So one thing is the business culture. You have to understand the psyche and the mentality of the people coming into the workforce. The second thing I talked about is infrastructure. That's a very important part. Remember I talked about Wells Fargo and people thinking it's a transportation company? We took a client, a $2.5 billion healthcare company, best performing stock over the last 10 years. They got an offer rejection because the parents didn't know the company, so they wanted their son who was working for GE to work for a Cognizant or Infosys or a brand name company. Now, the environment that you provide to them is very important, because some people, not everybody comes from centrally air-conditioned houses or even air-conditioned houses or cars with uninterrupted power supply. So when you create this work environment and the business infrastructure, you give them food, you give them transportation, you give them a world-class facility with a billiards room and a pool room and a TV to watch your IPL games, they are actually motivated to come to work. So the work culture there is, when I come to work, I have a much better working environment than my home and my surroundings, so I'm motivated to spend more time there. If you go to the Infosys campus, you want to leave it. I just like to sleep there all day and night. It's beautiful. So that's very important. And the last thing is, like I said, brand recognition. Everybody wants to, like I said, you didn't get into IIT, so, everybody wants to work for Goldman Sachs. Everybody wants to work for, McKinsey. But there's Indian companies that are doing fantastically well. There are American companies that are not recognized that are also operating in India, and all of them have opportunities in every facet of every organization. IT, leadership roles, organizational finance roles, HR roles, business development roles, operational support roles. I mean, all these roles are available, not just in the big companies, but in even a small company. So there's a lot of different opportunities where, we talk about the overall ecosystem of how Indian jobs and Indian career markets are providing for you guys. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So just that's my take on the overall ecosystem. And
So Ganesh, would you like to add something to that, differ on some points that Prabhakar made?
No, I want to add to that. I mean, I think there was a question as far as the compensation levels were concerned. Somebody talked about, I have a loan, go back to India, will I be able to repay it with the compensation that that Indian companies offer in India? The answer is no, right? If that is your expectation, then you're better off finding a job here. But the good news is that, as I mentioned earlier, Indian companies are looking for talent in the local markets. So if there's something that you bring to the table in terms of your understanding of the local market, your understanding of the industry segment here, or perhaps if you've been in sales or business development and you want to pursue a career in a client management, relationship management function, then your employability with an Indian company locally here at U.S. salaries, which will help you pay off your loans, but still be associated with the buzz that's happening in India, where you are actually delivering services to your customer, leveraging a global service delivery model. You get the best of both worlds. You are able to find that spot where, from a financial standpoint, you're able to meet your needs, and at the same time, from an opportunity standpoint, from a career standpoint, you are getting exposed to a global organization. You are getting exposed to stuff that's happening in emerging markets that helps you build up your resume. So that's the point that I want to make. But on the other hand, if you want to go to India, the compensation levels in India, again, a Hewitt survey for 2010 shows that of all the Asia-Pacific countries, India is leading the pack. Right? Across 18 industry segments, the survey was done. 2010, India was running at 11.7% year on year. And this year is expected to be 12.9%. That's one data point. The next 3 years, they estimate it to be growing at about 12 to 15%. Second thing that's happening in India is in terms of the compensation structure itself. There was a time where variable compensation was pretty much restricted to the top executives and senior executives. Not so long ago, 2006. But since 2006, the industry has seen a shift, especially in IT and BPO, where today, even at entry level, 10% of their compensation is linked to performance. It's a variable component, where there's, in most cases, no limits. Linked to company performance as well as individual performance. Right? So that's another thing. So from an opportunity standpoint, you need to obviously figure out, is compensation extremely important, then you're better off finding a suitable role here. But if you're looking at a combination of exposure to the growth that's happening in India, plus associated returns in terms of finance from a compensation standpoint, then you're better off finding a suitable role out of India.
Thank you, Ganesh. one question that came out, I think from the gentleman at the back was, and Praveen specifically addressed to you, given that you have gone there, came back here, and you are the only ABCD on the panel which is closest to non-Indian, is how does this ecosystem or infrastructure impact the interest from non-Indian origin people to find a job or find a job related to India? Because I actually concur the point you made is that the interest from non-Indian folks to find a job in India or find a job related to India is little lesser than probably some other popular geographies. So would you like to comment on that? How does infrastructure or ecosystem play a role, if it does?
In non-Indian folks, or non-Indian origin folks
Yes,
trying
yes.
to get a job in India. I mean, so when I was in India, there was a huge population of non-Indian folks who were coming in from, France, from the UK, from Australia. You may not see it as much from the US as you will from sort of more European or Eastern-based countries, but I mean, I think mostly from the non-Indian origin side, I mean, part of it was more cultural. I think people who wanted to come live in India outside of the work experience and have some experiences there. I mean, I think for people from the non-Indian origin, it maybe is a little bit shock if you haven't been in India for some time, getting used to infrastructure challenges, getting used to the fact, you go to Bombay and it's more expensive to live there than New York in a lot of places. So there's a lot of things that, from the outside, you wouldn't really quite face when going in. But I would say, overall, once you get situated and once you're able to live there, there's, I would think, a lot of opportunity even for people of, non-Indian origin to go and work and have an impact in India. So.
And probably the last follow-up question, and then I'll open up to the house, is related to the same question that...
Puneet,
sorry,
if I may...
sure, go ahead.
For the gentleman that's sitting at the back who had that question, our company just launched a program called the Future Leaders Program, where we are hiring from overseas business schools, including Chicago Booth. This is a program that we just launched where we are looking at local talent. It's a 2-year program. It's a full-time employment where we will be rotating these folks over a period of 2 years across 3 different functions, and the functions will be globally located. So it will perhaps be in a business unit here in North America for 8 months, part of our M&A and strategy team out of Bangalore in India for 8 months, and part of our delivery organization in Shanghai in China for 8 months. Right? So we are looking, and increasingly I'm sure many of our peers also have similar programs, are looking at hiring local talent of non-Indian origin to be a part of our organization, to bring in that cultural blend, cultural mix within the organization as we attempt to be more global in nature.
I want to add something.
Sure, go ahead.
So I think a lot of people from the U.S. who are going to India are still, in some sense, mavericks. Okay, and I can give you some examples of real people whom I met. A young man named Joe Siegelman, who had been to India as a teenager and absolutely hated it for the 3 days he spent there, but when he graduated from school, decided to go set up a company in Chennai. He and his partner moved lock, stock, and barrel. He lived 3 years at a hotel, for the entire 3-year period, and built a company called Office Tiger and sold it to R.R. Donnelley for $200 million, and had a tremendous experience doing that. One of the key advisors to the Delhi Metro, we've all heard how successful the Delhi Metro is, right? And most people associate it with the success of the Indian leader of the Delhi Metro. Of course, Sridharan's leadership has been a big part of it. They associate it with Japanese capital. Most people don't think Americans were involved at all in it. Well, I'm here to tell you that they were. Okay? And I interviewed one of the key Americans who went to India, and his company essentially kind of abandoned him after they realized that they couldn't place 100 expat Americans that the Delhi Metro would pay for. So he said, fine, I will work with your Indian engineers at the public sector company that was doing the design, and he got them together to help design a world-class system. Okay? And he's become an absolute convert after his company decided to pull out of India. The Delhi Metro hired him and has kept him on at American salaries working in India. Okay. There are many, many such cases, but most of these people are too busy doing what they are doing to be out there in the media talking about it. In the social sector, the NGO sector, you will find Americans all over India who are doing tremendously good work. And many of them are now getting into these hybrid organizations that are also, starting to produce profits. You look at green energy, you look at work in the villages. There's a tremendous impact that Americans are having in India. You just don't see it as, reported as much in the press.
Thank you. Any questions, folks, related to the ecosystem part of our discussion, meaning as you were considering your career to go or not go back to India, apart from the economic aspect of it, how many of you kind of struggled with the question of whether I can live in India, whether I can work in that work culture? And was there any such debate in your mind? Yeah, go ahead.
I can attempt to take that. There's again another Hewitt survey where work-life balance is stated as the fourth reason. There are top three reasons. The first one being better opportunities, second compensation, third is higher studies, and fourth is the work-life balance. And this is again the workforce in India. So it's amongst the top four reasons why people leave the organization. And interestingly, when they leave, they choose to work for an MNC because there are MNCs. There are over 900 MNCs that are set up in our industry, in our sector, that employ roughly about 400,000 out of India. So they choose to leave India-based, India-centric organizations like ours, Wipro, TCS, and join the Oracles and the Accentures and the IBMs of the world. But guess what? There's no work-life balance there as well because we are servicing the same clients. Right? So that's one thing to keep in mind, that if you were to work in India, especially looking at servicing the global clients, you have to compromise on your work-life balance. The second thing that's happening increasingly in the United States, and you can check out with your colleagues here from North America, their work-life balance is changing. Right? I have, as part of my leadership team, 4 Americans working here out of North America. People who've been in CIO roles for large organizations like Aon, MetLife, and others. Right? Who had a better work-life balance in those corporate organizations because they never had to deal with global services delivery organizations. They had teams of people who would do that for them. But today they're part of my organization where they're now servicing the customers. They're servicing the industry. And they're on conference call on Saturday night. They're on conference call Sunday morning. Right? So increasingly, it is important because the whole ecosystem is becoming very global. Competition is no longer local. Right? If you don't do it, we're going to find people who are going to do it. So I'm not saying it's not important, but at the end of the day, you have to find where that work-life balance comes from. Right? And organizations like us are okay if on a Friday afternoon or a Thursday afternoon you want to take a couple of hours to go to the gym and work out, as long as you are available for calls in the morning and in the night. Right? So there are various ways of striking that work-life balance, but it's not that you can't box it saying that come Friday evening, I'm going to switch off my BlackBerry, I'm going to switch off my laptop, I'm not going to look at emails until Monday morning.
Perfect. I think that's a nice segue into the next section, which is which I'll invite Gunjan to speak to, which is about the growth opportunities, learning, experience, and work culture. And those things, as you can imagine, are very, very interrelated. I mean, your growth and learning sometimes are related to your compromises on work and life balance. So Gunjan, can you please take that topic?
Okay, so let me just add a couple of comments to the last question here. I think you fundamentally have to look at these questions carefully and differently. For most people, at fast-growing Indian companies, it's easy to say there is absolutely no work-life balance. Okay, they start working as soon as they wake up, and sometimes they're in the office until 9 p.m. Okay, but there is another way that they do deal with it. Okay, which is that most Indian companies do give you 30 days of vacation. I don't think I know of very many American companies that do, and you do in India when you do have a family occasion, a wedding. An important ceremony, the colleagues are very understanding about taking time off. Okay, I don't think you'll find that in a Western company. Okay, so you have to weigh those things. You have to have the right dimensions to be able to evaluate that. Now, that being said, one of my dearest friends spent much of his career at IBM, and when IBM was reducing, he was early on in outsourcing, and I advised him to accept an offer at Infosys. He worked there for a year and decided he just couldn't handle it. He felt like he could never really get any sleep. So it was a pretty tough choice for him, and he's back now working for a Western company. So I think it's a very valid question.
Yeah, let me just tie this back to the question that was asked earlier. In my experience also, I find this to be one of the very important aspects of people of non-Indian origin finding it hard to work, whether it's in India or with Indian companies. Because it's very hard to be in a system where one set of your colleagues are not aspiring for or looking for work-life balance while you are. So I think that's a pretty large reason that I have seen for people not to get so easily interested in an Indian organization, whether in India or outside. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, as far as learning opportunities and growth opportunities, I would advise anyone who goes to work for an Indian company or to work in India is, regardless of your terrific education here at this university, you have to approach your Indian colleagues and India with much humility. Okay, you are going to learn from them. Okay, and you are going to learn from people who didn't go to a famous school as you did. Okay, now just a slight segue. I'm an IIT Kanpur alumnus. I'm presently the president of the Alumni Association of all the IITs, and I often remind my IIT alumni colleagues that tremendous good work is being done in India in many sectors where IITians have no role whatsoever. Okay, and they need to understand and respect that. So I would say the same thing, for Booth alums. You will find that there are people who don't know quite how to use a spreadsheet, but they can tell you about discounted cash flow, just in their heads, because they grew up with it. These are the kids of Marwadi families who have Excel embedded in their brains, from age 3. Okay, so you have to go with a healthy degree of humility and the ability to understand that all the great tools that you've learned here have a place, but the Eastern methods of doing things aren't necessarily worse. Okay, so if you go there with an attitude, one of the things we were talking about, transfer of talent, or how to manage Indians, it is a question that you are going to learn from them as much as you are going to be able to to transfer what you've learned to them. Okay? It has to be a two-way street if you are going to be really successful. Now let me get more specific about differences in work culture that become challenging to Americans who have to deal with India. Okay? One of the first things that I learned when I came to this country was the saying, let's call a spade a spade. Okay, and I didn't understand that for several years. Okay, because I didn't have the vocabulary to understand it. Okay, no right-minded Indian ever calls a spade a spade. Okay, India, like many Asian cultures, is a culture steeped in indirect communication. Okay. So if you don't understand indirect communication, you are going to be extremely flustered. Okay? Because when you say something, your colleagues are going to try and interpret it 10 different ways. The way you shrug your shoulder, the way you look this way or that, everything you do is going to be interpreted. And likewise, when you ask a direct question, you're very seldom going to get a direct answer. Okay? Now, if you're in a meeting and you ask a question and somebody answers it, your Indian colleagues know exactly what's going on. Okay, and you are sitting there saying, what happened here? Much communication has taken place, and you are naive and innocent about it. Okay? So take the time to understand what indirect communication is all about. The good thing about India is that unlike some other Asian cultures like China or Japan or Korea, whether you are of Indian origin or of an ABCD or anything else, it doesn't matter. Indians are used to dealing with diversity. Okay, so if you are working in Cochin and you happen to be from Texas, you are not that different from a Bengali who happens to be in Cochin. Okay, so if you have the humility, if you are willing to listen and ask questions, pretty soon you become one of them. Okay, and this whole barrier against indirect communication goes away, and you start to learn how to communicate successfully indirectly. And again, I want to emphasize the fact about humility. Don't assume that the American way is better. Okay. Direct communication isn't always the best form of communication, and anybody who's married can attest to that. The other factor to consider is the idea of time. Okay, and no, don't giggle, because I'm going to say something that's very different from what most of you are expecting. Okay, so most of you think that I'm going to talk about how things in India are always late, right? And there's a place I could talk about it, but I'm going to tell you about another dimension. Okay, Indians can multitask far better than Western cultures can. Okay, and the worst offender for us in the last 25 years has been Microsoft Outlook. Okay, in corporate America, we look at our day in time slices of 15 minutes. Okay, and when we assign a calendar time to one thing, by golly, that's the only thing we can do at that time. Okay, most Indians, from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep, are used to multitasking. Okay, so I tell people, don't be offended if someone answers your cell phone. In fact, when I give talks, I tell people, turn on your cell phone, and if it rings, answer it. Because when you're going to do business in India, that's what people will do with you. Okay, and if you can't deal with that, don't go to India. Okay. Now, this plays out in a positive manner in many situations where there's a business discussion going on, an interrupt comes in because someone walks into the room, or that you get a phone call, something happens, and the people take care of it, and things keep moving. Okay. In Western culture, we see that as a bad thing. Okay. But in the world of today, when things are moving so fast, okay, it is actually a good thing. Okay. So again, understand how to deal with multitasking, and if you go to India, look at this as something that you will grow and improve if you can start to do. Okay. We've already talked about the role of family, so I won't stress that. The one other factor I do want to stress is deference. Okay. In India, it is still generally accepted that somehow the boss knows more, and the boss is always right. Okay. Now, all of us who have an intellectual mindset know that the reverse is usually the case. Okay. Knowledge in an organization flows. There's more knowledge the lower down you go. Okay. But Indian employees typically don't believe that yet. Okay. So within your colleagues and within your organization, you have to encourage people to disagree with you. Okay, if you have a Western education and you're managing Indian employees, and that's a very difficult thing to do. Okay, because it's so ingrained in people to want to guess what you want, and then they'll give you the answer that you expect to hear. Is the project on time? Yes. Are there any problems? No, sir. Sirji, everything is fine. Okay, you actually want them to disagree, and so you have to reward them for disagreeing. And that takes quite a while to do. Now, some American companies have become very successful at encouraging their Indian employees to do that. I would say IBM is at that point, GE is at that point, but most American companies and most Americans going to India today struggle with that.
Excellent. Gunjan, by the way, I have to admit, I did not know Gunjan before yesterday, but after looking at his perception and his preciseness of Indian culture, I'm going to read your book because it's excellent. So thank you for that. One other point I'll ask you to address, which actually, Arvind, you had asked, how does it manifest itself, the things you talked about, in wide gap between the public sector performance and private sector performance? Because I think many of these things and some more come into play, why talent does not go to public sector, or right talent doesn't go to public sector. So that would be great to get your perspective.
Okay, great question. So, as Shashi Tharoor once said, for every answer in India, there's an equal and opposite answer. And both are generally true. Sometimes there are three opposite answers and all are true. Okay, so you have to be, you have to take this with that view. We talked about 2.4 million people working in IT services in India, right? The Indian Railways employs 1 million people. Okay, the Indian Army is another 980,000 people. Okay, so there are vast government organizations in India. Many of them are extremely poorly run, but not all. Okay, there are pockets of excellence. I've been working closely with the Nuclear Power Corporation of India. Excellent organization. They are very passionate, very motivated. They're working. For the last 40 years, they've worked in the most difficult circumstances imaginable, and they have on their own designed 700 megawatt power stations running. About 16 of them all across the country. Without any Western help, and doing a terrific job. That being said, most of the progress in India has taken place despite the public sector. And I don't know how well a U.S. entity can engage with the Indian public sector at large. The issues that you see playing out are not necessarily the issues that are on the surface. It's really, the politicians and the forces behind the scenes that are often driving the decisions in one direction or another. And you really have to be embedded into the local culture to be able to take advantage of those trends. And that's why you'll see consistently in many businesses, the domestic companies will do far better than foreign entrants. And I think it's a pretty tough call to be able to compete with them. I do see that happening. I do see foreign companies selling to the Indian Railways and succeeding. I do see some other initiatives like that in the defense area in particular. But it's a tough call. Is this as an advisor to the public sector, or? I see. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it really comes down to an issue of leadership, and if you want to engage deeply with India, you have to do it, I think, at the state level. You mentioned some states that are forward-looking. Andhra, perhaps. I would put Gujarat at the top of that list. Any dealings we have had in Gujarat have just been, it's really hard to believe sometimes how proactive they are. One of my clients wanted to buy some land for their factory, and the government employee showed up at the airport on a Sunday to greet my person who went to Baroda to look at various land opportunities. And she was very encouraged. She thought there was a catch here. She thought he had come with some special request, if you know what I mean. And there was no agenda. He was genuinely there to help us. That was all he wanted. Okay, that's happening in many states in India. And I think those are the states you want to deal with. And some of those are surprising states. I'm not just talking about Gujarat and Maharashtra and Karnataka. I would put today Bihar into that category. The current administration in Bihar is far more forward-looking. Now, I grew up in Uttar Pradesh. I do not recommend you go there.
Thank you, Gunjan. Praveen, moving on to the next point, which is actually as all of us have grown in our careers, a point which is sometimes not taken into account while making early career choices is ability to make an impact. And as you grow in your career, you start realizing how important aspect of career satisfaction that is. So, Praveen, if you could highlight, based on your numerous experiences, in today's world, being in an India-related career or job, what are the kind of impacts and ability to make an impact that a participant or a candidate can have?
I mean, I think this is one to be particularly careful of as well, because I think, just because you had an education here or you worked in a Western company, it doesn't always really translate over in terms of your ability to make an impact directly. I mean, one, you'll find, I think someone brought up the question of competition within India. So, my colleagues at work, I worked at an Indian private equity firm, and they were, IIT, IMA, IMB, and incredibly smart people who worked incredibly hard. And just because of whatever background, it come from here, really wasn't, to be honest, that much of an advantage. So at one level, I think just the blanket statement that you've worked here and you've done things doesn't always translate. And I think this relates to another point as well. Someone had brought up a question on when is the best time to go to India. Is it better to stay here and work for a few years or go to India and stay there for? And I think that's a very difficult question. And at one level, I would say that if you want to be in India in the long run, I think the sooner you get there, the better off you are. I mean, maybe one caveat to that is that, and one thing on ability to make impact is that you'll see within, if you compare U.S. markets to Indian markets right now, U.S. markets are a lot more deep. So if you wanted to start a new company or if you wanted to start a business in the U.S., the domain knowledge that you would need on industry or the amount you would have to work in the industry is pretty tremendous. Whereas in India tomorrow, you may be able to start a retail financial brokerage. Just because the penetration of products is not as deep, and two, I think the advancement of things is not as deep there. And so there is a tremendous ability to make, an impact on that front. And I think to the extent that you have some special skills or knowledge or things that you're learning here that don't quite exist in India, those things that can transfer, be it in logistics or be it insurance or mobile. But to the extent that, it's a really general-based business and you want to be in India in the long run, I think you're better off going right now. When I look at my industry, when I was in PE, a lot of your ability to succeed depended on your knowledge of local companies and the relationships you had with local businesses. And whether you worked at Goldman in New York or Goldman in San Francisco didn't really help you find a mid-market company, in India to look at. So that, I think the question of whether to make an impact or not really depends on the industry that you want to go into and what skills that you think you're bringing in there that may not exist within the country itself. And I think, too, also, you have to look at the organization that you're growing. And I think one of the points that was brought up was that, sometimes it can be a little hierarchical where people don't challenge what's going on. And so if you go into an organization and think you know more than the promoter there or want to do more than the promoter there knows, you probably won't get very far. So you have to be in an organization that also wants you to contribute and wants you to work. So I think...
Sure.
Yeah.
Any other point to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, somebody mentioned, what's the value that let's say you're working for an American company and you decide to go to India, and what's the value or the perspective or the operational experience that you would gain? I think it's a very relevant question. When companies, and we hire a lot of, global talent, and we put them in India, the biggest premium currently multinationals are giving today, it's very different paradigm for Indian companies. Indian companies want to have, U.S. local experience and relationship management, like Ganesh was pointing out, Infosys, Wipro, all of them are looking for that. Multinationals wanting to operate need a local trusted partner, but they just can't go find a local trusted partner. They would much rather have somebody that understands their firm culture, the firm operations, and put them in India. So once you do that, you have to learn when you're operating in India all the things Gunjan pointed out. 2 years, you'll be part of the local Indian operating culture, or 3 years, or whatever time it takes. Again, how much flexibility you have in your ability to adapt. What that does for you is now you actually have global operating experience. Now, let's say the company you're working for, its biggest competitor is looking at India or trying to expand. You become a much more high-priced premium resource or human capital asset for anybody, because now you not only have domain expertise of whatever you were doing in the U.S., but you now have global operating experience. And that is invaluable, because I can tell you that's the biggest thing most of my multinational clients are looking for. Because everybody sitting in the room here, has a great education, has a great background, investment banking, consulting, technology, but once you have that operational India experience or China experience, you are much more valuable to any global multinational corporation. Because everybody, like you said, almost all 1,000 of the Fortune 1,000 have operations outside of the United States, especially in Asia. But if you weren't part of that operating experience, you're sitting on the sidelines looking at all the growth happening. So you have to embed yourself and insert yourself into that. And it's going to be tough. It's not going to be a smooth transition. And the last thing was on the compensation part, which I think we're going to get to. There's some interesting calculations you can do about paying off loans and WAC and stuff that we'll get into.
Sure. Ganesh, anything to add to this aspect of
No, I think
ability to make an impact? So just one point I'd like to add is, you see, any economy or any company, the highest impact you can make it when it's at infancy, or to use our keynote speaker's word, when there's a lot more headroom, because there's a lot more room left to influence it. And like you hear in mutual fund advertisements, that past is not an indicator of future. I think in terms of careers, we are at a stage where the past careers, which created huge value both economically and impact-wise, are no longer indication of where the future careers will come. So, in fact, if I was to give one advice to the MBA class this year, next year, or the subsequent years, is that you really have to step back and not look at what careers gave best results in US last 20-25 years. And what is amazing is the careers that are top today, and I have belonged to two of them, so I can speak freely about that, is investment banking and consulting, which were so good for various reasons. They lose a lot of their perspective, a lot of their value when you move to the new world, which is the next 30-year world. And that will include things like operating experience, local international experience. So the ability to make an impact is definitely much higher in nascent economies, which is economies like India. But the way you play them has to be much more initiative-driven, not like a brand-driven that you go to McKinsey. Nothing against that company, but the role is now changing pretty dramatically. And in fact, one point I would make is that, and now we'll get into the financial aspect, is the compensation structures in India, the best values are being created actually not from these traditional banking and consulting roles, but from entrepreneurial and corporate leadership roles. So the difference in compensation, not in the beginning, but 5 years out, is dramatically different between those two. So that's very interesting, I think, a challenge I would ask you guys to take up, to really make the decision not based on 5-year horizon, but 30-year horizon. And then your answers may change for some of you. So let's go on to the last point, and then we'll open up to broad questions. The last point is actually on the very important aspect, and it's also an indication of the value you add, is the compensation, financial economics of doing work with an Indian company or being in India. And Ganesh, you are probably well positioned to take that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it earlier on as well, but it's not just again related to the IT and BPO industry, right? The other industries are also booming. As wealth is getting created because of the outsourcing boom that's happening, people are spending that money in the local markets. So there's expansion happening in the retail segment. There's expansion, people are traveling, so the travel segment is booming. So, and each one of those segments, as people start spending money, are driving employment opportunities with higher pay scales. Right? So clearly, from an India industry standpoint today, the fastest segments are no longer IT. It's manufacturing, it's telecom, it's travel. These are areas that are experiencing significant growth in compensation. Second is the compensation structure is increasingly shifting to be more and more performance driven, which was not the case earlier. There's disproportionate differentiation that's happening as far as compensating high performers. To give you an example, 2006, the difference in annual increase between an average performer and a top performer was about 30%. So if an average performer got $100 as an increase, the top performer would have gotten $130. That has changed significantly now to 1:2. So as long as you are amongst the top talent, you can expect compensation increases to be substantial, right? The other thing that is happening is the bell curve, the traditional bell curve is shrinking. It's becoming sharper. A few years ago, you would find almost 55% of employee performers to be in the top 2 category, right? 2010, that's down to 35%. So what that means is as long as the bell curve is shrinking and you have fewer people at the top, they get, again, compensated very, very disproportionately. So whether you look at working for an Indian company or whether you look at working for a multinational company in India or any of the locations overseas, but having something to do with India, clearly from a compensation standpoint, there are tremendous upside opportunities in the years to come.
Any other points?
Yeah, I wanted to cover, Ganesh pointed out, the whole compensation and the structuring of salary bands is changing. And I know most of the students come in here with, a few years of experience working in the U.S. pre-MBA, making anywhere from, depending on what company, $50,000 to $80,000, $90,000. You make a 2-year investment, you borrow $150,000 or whatever it costs you to make that. But your cost of debt is about anywhere from, 6%, 3%, depending on if it's subsidized, 7%, 8%, okay. All right, so, 8%. Ganesh threw out a statistic that the average compensation increase in India over the next 5 years is going to be 12.5% to 13%. And this is for average. Given the intellectual bandwidth you guys have and the ability to get into booth, I think you would assume you'd be in the upper end of the spectrum there. So yes, temporarily you have to take a lower pay cut, but it's also a long-term investment. Because remember the premium I told you people were paying on operational international experience. In 5 to 10 years, you would have gained operational experience and grown up at 12% when you're paying off debt at 6% or 8%. You still have a 4% arbitrage opportunity. So you have a couple of years more of an investment, but in 5 years, let's say you're 30, at 35 or 40, you have 10 years of global international experience, 5 years of U.S. experience, an MBA from Booth. At that point, you're getting packages upwards of $250,000 because now you're actually managing P&Ls, you're managing people. That's just base packages. And you can't compare that. And in fact, when you're a high performer in a company, in India, there's always a fight for good talent. People come after you. We had people that had, mobile development experience, which is, everybody's going on to mobile and building these things. Mahindra Satyam's come in and offering them 40% salary jumps, 80% salary jumps. So you can't compete with that. And if you start performing well and people know what you're capable of doing in your domain or in your operation, the market will come to you in terms of compensation. So the short term, how do I service my loan? The other important factor is cost of living. Let's say you're making $120,000 out of MBA school here. After taxes, you get maybe $7,000. By the time you pay your apartment and your school loan and everything, you're left with $1,000. That's your savings, if that. If you go into India with an MBA, with whatever 5 years of experience today, you probably get a 20 to 25 lakhs salary or maybe higher depending on a multinational opportunity, which is still only $50,000 US. But $4,000 in India goes a long way. It costs you $2,000 to live there with, a decent house and all that. And it's easier to go when you don't have family and kids and the whole infrastructure because you're not taking a risk for your entire family. You're doing it when you're younger. And like Praveen said, the sooner you go, you're not sitting on the sidelines. So I would just kind of say that.
One more point I'd like to add, actually, the two very important considerations when you look from financial perspective for a career in India. One is the inflection points are very, very steep. So there are points that come, and I don't know whether it's 5 years or 10 years, somewhere in that range, your compensation just starts taking off and overtakes US levels. And the second thing is that to the extent that you have ability or kind of you can negotiate. Once you can get into some kind of equity play, some options, those are very, very highly valuable. So as many of my friends who joined Infosys when I was graduating, which was from IIT, they did far better financially than any of us. Because though the benefit you get is not only compensation, but the equity growth. And equity growth in typical Indian companies far better. So that's another way to look at it. But yes, first few years you have to probably take a hit compared to a US compensation, especially in the context of the loan. But in long run, actually, it plays out. And I think, I don't know who was recommending, but there's one approach which is obviously you work here for some year and go. But then the risk is what Praveen mentions, that if you want to stay there for longer term, it may not be, you will lose out on that global operating experience. So I think with this, I think we are probably done with the panel. But any questions that you folks have, anything follow on related, please feel free to ask. I mean, this is probably the most important decision you will be making or have already made at this stage of your life.
So what's the best place to look for jobs for after getting actually on top sites, or what top recruitment firms back in India to look at?
I'm going to make a very short answer. You went to school at Booth. You have a community directory. That's the first place I would start. Forget any job site. Your network, your classmates, this is the power of social networks. Your friends will tell you what you're doing. They will talk about their company just opened an office in Bangalore, or I work for Infosys or Emphasis. Your classmates will say, I know what you can do in class. You were in my study group. Most of my business partners and my clients are my classmates. So no networking. The power of networking is amazing. And given that you're now part of the Booth community and coming out or soon to be an alum, you have to go network relentlessly. That's the only way you'll get your next opportunity.
I mean, if you find such website, send it to me.
Send it to us.
I'm happy to see it.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing about the business school network, I think when you go into India as well, you'll find that your business school network is not just Booth, but every school that's there. So you'll very quickly meet people from every university. And so if you just spend a little time just going out and meeting people, your network can expand pretty quickly. But yeah, it's
And another way to do research is, let's say you're in the IT consulting business and you work for Accenture and you want to go work for Wipro. You can go and do a company search, or you go there, find out which Booth alum is working for Wipro in the Naperville office, or in the Chicago office or New York office, or who's working there. And they'll always, that's the only way to network and say, hey, I'm just graduating. Most Booth alums are pretty good about returning phone calls or emails, and at least helping out a future Booth alum or a fellow Booth alum, and at least they try to help. And once you go out, identify, because we can't tell you what you're trying to look or what you want to do in 5 years, what domain expertise you have, whether you came out of retail where you worked for Walmart for 5 years and then now you're looking to go into iBanking and work for Goldman Sachs. Just because you got an MBA, how do you make that transition? So it's difficult for anybody to say that, but you have to make that decision and then leverage the network.
But I think one interesting way to go about it depends on what you want to do. If you open up your scope to maybe broader things than just professional services, you'll find that a lot of business school alumni, will be in the venture capital, private equity world, and they've invested in a lot of very interesting companies that I think because of their position, they can sort of realize maybe what someone with an education here or experience can do for their companies. And there's creative ways to go about it, but it's you really have to go out and talk to people.
Any other question?